That morning, my son looked me straight in the eye and said, "If you don't want to go to a nursing home, then get a job." His wife smirked from across the room, and my granddaughter lowered her head. I didn't shout, I didn't beg, I simply smiled, the kind of smile you give when your heart breaks clean in two. An hour later, as I packed my blue suitcase, a black car stopped in front of the gate. That car changed everything. If you've ever been through something like this, hit that like button or leave a comment below. I read every one of them. Now, let me tell you how it all started. When my son Ethan said those words, the world around me stopped breathing. I could still hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, the distant laughter from the TV in the living room, but inside me, everything went silent. My ears rang as if someone had slammed a door inside my head. If you don't want to go to a nursing home, then get a job. The sentence echoed like a gunshot fired in slow motion. My hands trembled, but not from age, from the weight of a truth I had refused to see for too long. He wasn't saying it out of frustration. He meant it. Every syllable was cold, sharp, deliberate. Ethan stood there, tall and confident, wearing the same grey suit I had bought him when he got his first promotion. He was 38 now, a grown man with a family, a mortgage, and apparently no memory. His wife, Megan, leaned against the kitchen counter, arms folded, with that smug smile she always wore when she thought she'd won something. "He's just being honest, Mum," she added. "You've been here for months and we really need our privacy." Privacy. That word hit me harder than the rest. Privacy from what? From me? The woman who once stayed up all night sewing his Halloween costumes, who skipped her own meals to pay for his school trips, who held his hand through every fever, heartbreak, and broken bone. Now I was an inconvenience, an unwanted shadow in my own child's home. I looked at them both, and 1,000 words fought to leave my mouth, but none did. I just smiled. Not the kind of smile people give when they're fine, but the one that hides a storm. My throat burned and my eyes stung, but I refused to cry. I had already wasted too many tears on people who didn't notice them. "I'll figure something out," I said finally, my voice soft but steady. Ethan nodded, relieved that I didn't argue. Megan picked up her phone, already done with the conversation. "Good," she murmured. "We'll talk later about arrangements." Arrangements. I was a shipment now, something to be delivered elsewhere. I turned away before they could see my face twist in pain. I walked down the narrow hallway to my room, a small guest space that used to be the storage closet before they remodeled the house. My steps were slow, deliberate. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, my heart pounding in my ears. I looked around the room, a narrow bed, a tiny dresser, a few family pictures I had placed on the nightstand to make it feel like mine. The air smelled faintly of lavender and cleaning spray, the kind Megan used every morning after I finished making breakfast. She always sprayed it right after, like she needed to erase my scent from the kitchen. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to breathe. The silence pressed on me like a heavy blanket. I wanted to scream, but all that came out was a weak laugh. "A job," I whispered to myself, at 65. I had worked all my life, 40 years as a nurse, 40 years of caring for strangers while my body broke piece by piece. My back still ached from the double shifts, my hands still bore scars from needles and disinfectants, and now my own son wanted me to get a job. I stood up, opened the closet, and pulled out my old blue suitcase, the same one I had used when I first moved out of the house I shared with my late husband, Michael. The zipper squeaked like an old memory waking up. I started packing in silence. 2 pairs of jeans, a few blouses, my nightgown, my Bible, a small jewelry box with my wedding ring, and the photo of Ethan as a baby. He was smiling in that picture, wide, pure, with eyes that looked at me like I was his whole world. When I held that photo, my fingers trembled. Somewhere between that little boy and this man in a suit, I had lost him. Or maybe he had lost me. Outside, I heard a car horn, a deep, steady honk. I peeked through the curtain, expecting to see the delivery truck that came by every Thursday. But no, it wasn't that. Parked by the iron gate was a black sedan, shiny, elegant, unfamiliar. Its engine purred softly, like a cat waiting for attention. I frowned. No one I knew drove a car like that. Megan's voice echoed from the kitchen, sharp and curious. "Ethan, who's that? Are you expecting someone?" "No," he answered. His tone carried a hint of irritation. He stepped outside, adjusting his tie. "What on earth is that car doing here?" I didn't answer. I didn't even move. I just stood there, holding my suitcase. Something inside me whispered that my life was about to change, but not in the way they expected. For a brief moment, I thought of staying, of swallowing the humiliation, pretending everything was fine, and waiting for them to soften. But another voice, the one I had ignored for decades, finally spoke louder. "Leave. Just leave." My knees were shaking as I zipped the suitcase. The sound echoed like a final goodbye. I looked around the small room one last time, memorizing every crack on the wall, every mark of my existence they would soon erase. Then I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and opened the door. From the hallway, I could see Ethan standing at the gate, shielding his eyes from the afternoon sun. The car engine rumbled quietly. I couldn't see who was inside, but I didn't need to. All I knew was that the moment I stepped out of this house, nothing would ever be the same. I tightened my grip on the suitcase handle and walked toward the door. Megan looked up from her phone. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Out," I said simply. "For how long?" "As long as it takes." And before either of them could stop me, I stepped out into the sunlight. The moment I stepped outside, the sunlight hit me like a truth I'd been avoiding for years. Bright, merciless, impossible to hide from. I stood there for a second, squinting at the road, the quiet neighborhood, the life I had spent decades building and was now leaving behind. The air smelled like freshly cut grass and distance. I gripped my suitcase tighter and walked down the porch steps, each one echoing louder than the last. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay. The car was still there, black, gleaming, almost too clean for this old street. Through the tinted glass, I couldn't see the driver, but I felt watched, not in a threatening way, but as if someone was silently waiting for me to decide what kind of woman I wanted to be from this point on. I turned back toward the house one last time. Ethan was standing by the door, arms crossed, trying to look composed. Megan stood beside him, pretending to check her phone but clearly enjoying the performance. The look on Ethan's face wasn't guilt, it was relief. Relief that his burden was about to walk away on her own. That realization sliced through me deeper than any insult. I forced a smile, nodded once, and walked away. My suitcase wheels made a faint rattling sound on the pavement. It was the sound of something ending, quietly, painfully, without applause. As I walked, my mind drifted back to the years that had brought me here. The years I had chosen to remember as warm, even when they burned. I could still see Ethan as a boy, running down this same street with scraped knees and a lunchbox bouncing against his side. Back then, he used to wave at me from the school bus window every morning, mouthing, "Love you, Mum." I used to wait at that corner with a thermos of hot cocoa on cold days. I would do anything to see that little boy again, to tell him that I was proud of him, that I forgave him for everything he hadn't even done yet. But the truth is, that little boy was gone long before this day. I had just refused to see it. The first cracks appeared years ago after he married Megan. She was beautiful, confident, and ambitious, the kind of woman who didn't see value in anything that couldn't be measured in status or dollars. I tried to be kind. I gave her my wedding pearls, cooked her favorite dishes, even babysat their daughter so they could have time together. But no kindness ever reached her. She saw me as clutter, something that came with Ethan's past but didn't belong in their present. I still remember the first time she told me, "Eleanor, oh, sorry, Mum, you should really think about getting your own place. It's healthier for everyone." I laughed it off then. I thought she was just being young and thoughtless. I didn't know that someday she'd make Ethan believe the same thing. After my retirement, when I moved in with them, I told myself it was temporary. My health wasn't great, and being close to family made sense. But from day one, I could feel the tension. I made sure to stay out of their way. I cleaned up after myself, cooked dinner, watched my granddaughter quietly in the corner while they scrolled through their phones at the table. Still, I could feel Megan's eyes on me, sharp, judging, always looking for reasons to remind me that I didn't belong. Eleanor, could you not leave your cup there? Eleanor, please don't use that towel, it's decorative. Eleanor, maybe don't interfere when we discipline our child. Each comment was small on its own, but together they became a storm. I tried talking to Ethan once. I told him I felt out of place, that I could sense Megan didn't want me around. He sighed, rubbed his temples and said, "Mom, you're overthinking. Megan's just particular about her space." Her space. The house that stood on land Michael and I had bought 30 years ago. The same plot where we'd raised Ethan, built a swing in the backyard, planted rose bushes by the fence. My husband's ashes rested beneath the oak tree behind the house, and now it wasn't even my space. The irony was almost funny. The wind picked up, brushing against my grey hair. My knees ached, but I kept walking. I passed Mrs. Davis's old mailbox, the one I helped her repaint one summer, and the little grocery store on the corner where the cashier used to call me sweetheart. Those people still knew me, but they didn't know what I'd become, a woman who'd outlived her usefulness. I reached the bus stop and sat down, resting the suitcase beside me. For a moment, the exhaustion caught up. My body felt heavy, but my heart was heavier. I thought about calling someone, but there was no one left. My siblings had passed. Friends from the hospital had drifted away after I retired. The only people I had left had just told me to leave. I took out my wallet, looked at the folded photo of my late husband, Michael. "You'd know what to do," I whispered. His smile stared back at me, warm, eternal, like he was still telling me, "You're stronger than you think." Tears came, not loud, not dramatic, just quiet ones that rolled down without permission. It's strange, isn't it, how people talk about growing old as if it's a curse, when in truth it's a privilege. I had seen people die young, patients who never got to hold their grandchildren, women who worked until their hearts gave out. I was lucky to grow old. But in this world, being old means being invisible. The bus never came. Maybe it wasn't supposed to. Maybe something else was waiting for me. When I looked up again, the black car was still parked by the gate, unmoving, patient. Its headlights flickered once, like a signal. My chest tightened. I didn't know why, but I felt drawn to it, like the universe had sent me a messenger wrapped in leather seats and mystery. I stood up slowly, brushing off my skirt, and turned back. The house stood there, silent, watching me go, unaware that it had just lost its heart. I took one last deep breath and whispered, "Goodbye, Michael. Goodbye, home." Then I walked toward the car. When I reached the car, the engine went quiet, like it had been holding its breath for me. For a second, I just stood there on the sidewalk, suitcase in hand, unsure whether to approach or to turn back. Then the tinted window rolled down halfway, and I saw the driver's face, older, weathered, but familiar in a way that made my heart stumble. "Eleanor Hayes?" he asked. His voice was deep, calm, the kind that used to make me feel safe. I blinked. No one had called me by my full name in years. Not since Michael. Not since I was someone with a name, not just Mom or Grandma or her. "Yes," I said carefully. "Do I know you?" He smiled faintly. "It's been 40 years, but I never forgot you." That voice, it struck something deep, something buried under decades of exhaustion. "Thomas?" I whispered. He nodded once, like the name still belonged to him. "Get in, please. Let's talk." I should have hesitated, but I didn't. I walked around the car, opened the door, and slid into the passenger seat. The air inside smelled like cedar and faint cologne, like time had stopped and waited. He looked at me gently. "You look exactly how I imagined you'd look now. Still strong, still beautiful. I laughed under my breath. You need new glasses. No, he said. I just need you to believe me. The car rolled forward, slow and steady. Through the window, I saw Ethan still standing on the porch, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Megan beside him, already pulling him inside. They didn't wave. They didn't even look at me again. That hurt more than I expected. I turned away, facing the road, watching my reflection blur against the glass. How did you even find me? I asked. Thomas smiled without looking at me. Old friends. One of the nurses from St. Mary's told me you'd retired. I sent a few letters. Did you never get them? Letters. My heart sank. I remembered Megan sorting the mail every morning, tossing some envelopes into the recycling bin before I saw them. No, I whispered. I didn't. He sighed, not surprised. Then I'm glad I came myself. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the tires calm me. I hadn't realized until then how long it had been since I'd felt safe sitting beside someone. We drove in silence for a few miles. The town disappeared behind us. The grocery store, the elementary school, the church where Michael's funeral had been held. I pressed my hand against my chest, half expecting my heart to protest. Instead, it was still, tired, but steady. Thomas finally spoke. Where were you planning to go? I wasn't, I admitted. I was just leaving. He nodded, like he understood. Then you're coming with me. I turned to look at him. Thomas, I can't just... You can, he interrupted softly. You need a place to breathe, Ellie. You've been drowning in silence for too long. The way he said my old nickname made something break open inside me. Michael had never called me that. Only Thomas did, back when we were young and foolish and thought love could survive anything. We were supposed to marry once. Then life happened. My scholarship, his enlistment, letters that stopped coming, choices that changed everything. And now here he was, 40 years later, driving me away from a home that wasn't mine anymore. After an hour, he pulled into a small diner by the highway. The sign flickered above the door. Millie's Cafe, since 1968. The place looked like it hadn't aged since the day we first met. Come on, he said, smiling. You need coffee. Inside, everything smelled of warm syrup and burnt toast. The waitress, a woman with silver hair and a kind smile, led us to a booth by the window. I sat down slowly, my knees aching from the years, from the weight of everything that had just collapsed behind me. Thomas ordered 2 coffees and a slice of apple pie to share. You still take it black? He asked. I blinked. You remember that? I remember everything, he said simply. For a moment, I didn't speak. I didn't know how. My throat felt tight, like my voice had forgotten how to belong to me. He leaned forward. You don't have to tell me what happened. I can see it in your eyes. But I wanted to. I needed to say it out loud. Not for pity, but to finally set it free. My son, I began, thinks I'm a burden. His wife thinks I'm an inconvenience. They both want me gone. Thomas didn't interrupt. He just listened. The way people used to when listening meant something. I gave everything I had to raise him. I worked double shifts, slept in hospital lounges, missed birthdays, holidays. When his father died, I swore I'd make sure Ethan never lacked anything. I thought love and sacrifice were the same thing. I paused, looking at my trembling hands. But maybe I taught him that my pain didn't matter. Maybe I made it too easy for him to forget me. Thomas shook his head. No. You taught him what love looks like. What he did with that lesson isn't your fault. I looked out the window, watching cars pass by in blurs of colour. You make it sound simple. It is simple, he said. People forget kindness faster than cruelty, but life has a strange way of remembering for them. His words settled over me like a quiet truth. The waitress brought our coffee. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, letting the heat seep into my skin. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The clinking of dishes and the hum of a jukebox filled the silence. Then Thomas said something I didn't expect. "Come to North Carolina with me." I looked up. "What?" "I have land, a farmhouse, vineyards. It's peaceful. You can stay there as long as you want. No rent, no pressure, just peace." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "Thomas, that's crazy. You barely know me anymore." He smiled. "Ellie, I've known you all my life. Time doesn't erase that." Something about the way he said it, calm, certain, made me believe him. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. We left the diner just before sunset. The sky burned orange and gold, the kind of sky that looks like forgiveness. As we got back in the car, Thomas opened my door for me, the way men used to do when respect still meant something. I sat down, clutching my suitcase, and watched the fading sun through the windshield. As the car pulled onto the highway, I looked back one last time. The town was shrinking behind us, turning into shadows and distance. I thought of Ethan and Megan, probably having dinner, laughing, maybe even relieved that I was gone. The betrayal didn't sting anymore. It just felt heavy, like a bruise that had stopped hurting but would always stay. I whispered to myself, maybe this is what freedom feels like, when everything you thought you needed finally lets go. Thomas glanced at me, smiled softly, and turned on the radio. A slow jazz song filled the car, familiar and old. We didn't speak again for miles, but in the quiet between us, something shifted. I wasn't running anymore. I was being carried, not by him, but by the part of myself I thought had died years ago. We drove for hours through the long stretch of Southern Highway, the sun melting into the horizon, painting the world in amber light. I hadn't traveled this far in years. The hum of the tires against the asphalt was hypnotic, steady, almost like a lullaby. Thomas didn't talk much, and I didn't need him to. The silence between us wasn't heavy. It was healing. After everything that had happened, silence no longer felt like loneliness. It felt like space to breathe. By the time we crossed into North Carolina, the sky had turned a deep violet. Fireflies blinked along the edges of the road like tiny souls lighting the way. I rolled down the window, letting the cool air brush against my face. For the first time in years, I didn't feel trapped. I didn't feel watched. I didn't feel small. When we finally turned off the main road, a wooden sign appeared, illuminated by the headlights, Reynolds Vineyards. I felt a strange flutter in my chest. Thomas looked at me, smiling. "Welcome home." "Home?" I repeated softly. The word felt foreign on my tongue, like something I'd forgotten how to say properly. He parked in front of a wide, two-story farmhouse surrounded by endless rows of vines that glimmered under the moonlight. A white porch wrapped around the front, with a swing gently moving in the breeze. The smell of earth and grapes and pine trees mixed together, raw, honest, alive. I stepped out of the car, my shoes sinking slightly into the gravel. Crickets sang somewhere in the distance. The air was thick with summer. Thomas grabbed my suitcase before I could protest. "I'll take that," he said with a grin. I followed him up the porch steps. The wooden boards creaked in that comforting, old house kind of way. He opened the front door and motioned for me to go in. The house was warm, cozy, and lit by soft lamps. Wooden floors, bookshelves filled to the brim, photos on the walls. It smelled like cinnamon and thyme. It wasn't a mansion, it was a home, a place where stories lived. "I kept this room for guests," he said, opening a door on the left, "but something tells me it's yours now." Inside, there was a bed covered in white quilts, lace curtains fluttering by an open window, and on the nightstand, a small vase with fresh lilacs. I froze. "Lilacs," I whispered. "You remembered." He smiled. "You told me once they were your favourite, said they smelled like second chances." I touched the petals, my fingers trembling slightly. "That was a lifetime ago." He looked at me for a long moment. "Maybe this is the next one." Those words sank deep. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was afraid if I spoke, I'd break whatever fragile magic had wrapped itself around this moment. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was uncomfortable, the bed felt like heaven after months of tension, but because my mind wouldn't stop replaying the day, the conversation, the way Ethan looked at me, the way the door closed behind me, and the way Thomas said, "Welcome home." I got up and went to the window. Outside, the vineyard stretched endlessly, silver under the moonlight. Somewhere out there, I could hear frogs croaking and the distant hoot of an owl. It was quiet, so quiet it made me realize how loud my life had been when I lived with Ethan. The criticism, the judgment, the sighs, the constant reminders that I wasn't enough. Here, the silence didn't accuse me, it accepted me. I sat by the window, pulled the blanket around my shoulders, and whispered to myself, "You made it out, Eleanor. You really did." The next morning, sunlight poured through the curtains, soft and golden. I woke up to the smell of coffee and the faint sound of humming from the kitchen. When I walked in, Thomas was there, wearing a faded apron, flipping pancakes like he'd been doing it all his life. "You're up," he said, smiling. "I was about to come get you." "I haven't been woken by the smell of pancakes in years," I said, laughing lightly. "Then we'll make it a habit," he replied. We ate breakfast by the window, overlooking the vineyard. The air was fresh, and the world felt simple again. I told him about my life after we lost touch, the hospital, the marriage, Ethan, the long years of work. He listened without interrupting, his eyes soft with empathy. When I finished, he said quietly, "You've carried everyone else's pain your whole life. It's time you let someone carry you for a while." I wanted to argue, to tell him I didn't need anyone to take care of me, but the truth was, I was tired. I didn't want to be strong all the time anymore. "I don't know how to do that," I admitted. He smiled. "Then I'll teach you." The days passed slowly, gently. Each one peeled away a layer of tension I didn't even know I was holding. In the mornings, I walked through the vineyard, the dew dampening my shoes. The air smelled of earth and growth and possibility. Sometimes Thomas joined me. Other times he let me wander alone. He said it was important to hear the land breathe. In the afternoons, I helped him label bottles, water the flowers, cook dinner. We talked about books, about the world, about the way people forget to be kind once they start fearing time. He never pitied me, never treated me like I was fragile. He just saw me. Not as someone's mother, not as someone's burden, but as a woman who still had chapters left to write. One evening, as we sat on the porch swing, watching the sun dip behind the vines, Thomas said, "You know, I always imagined I'd end up alone. Then again, maybe some things just take longer to find their way home." I looked at him. "You really believe that?" He nodded. "I believe everything finds its way back when it's meant to, even love." I didn't answer, but I didn't have to. The quiet between us said more than words could. For the first time in a very long time, I wasn't waiting for someone else to love me. I was remembering how to love myself. That night, I wrote in an old notebook Thomas found in a drawer for me. Just a few lines. I thought my story ended when my son told me to leave, but maybe it was only the end of a chapter. And tonight, I turned the page. I closed the notebook, set it beside the vase of lilacs, and smiled. Because for the first time in years, I didn't feel lost. I felt found. The weeks that followed were like waking up in a different life, one where the air didn't carry judgment and time didn't feel like a punishment. Every morning, sunlight spilled across the porch and painted everything gold. The vines, the wooden railings, even my coffee mug. It felt like the world was apologizing for how cruel it had been. Thomas had a way of making ordinary things sacred. He'd whistle softly while feeding the chickens, hum old jazz songs while bottling wine, and sometimes, without saying a word, slide a cup of tea beside me when he saw I was deep in thought. We didn't need to talk much. There was peace in the silence, the kind that comes when someone truly understands you. One morning, he found me in the garden behind the house. I was kneeling in the dirt, planting lavender seedlings. The air was thick with the smell of soil and promise. "Never thought I'd see you gardening again," he said, walking up with 2 cups of coffee. I smiled. Neither did I. The last thing I planted was a rose bush by Michael's grave. I told myself that was the last thing I'd ever grow. "And now?" "Now," I said, patting the dirt over the roots. "I think it's time to grow something for me." Thomas didn't say anything. He just nodded, his eyes soft with the kind of pride that doesn't need words. Afternoons at the vineyard became my favorite part of the day. The sun would hang low, painting everything honey-colored. Sometimes I'd sit at the edge of the field, notebook in hand, writing down thoughts I'd never dared to say aloud. Other times I'd help the workers sort grapes or prepare the bottles for shipment. They were kind to me, respectful, not because of pity, but because they saw how much I wanted to help. Thomas would often come over, pretending to supervise. He'd lean on the wooden post, watching me label bottles. "You know," he said once, "you have a steady hand. I could use that in the office." I laughed. "Oh no, I'm retired. I don't take orders anymore." He chuckled. "Good thing I'm not giving any." That was Thomas, gentle, teasing, always making me feel like the world hadn't passed me by. One evening, while we sat on the porch swing with glasses of wine, he asked, "Do you ever think about going back?" I looked out at the horizon. The thought of Ethan and Megan flickered in my mind like a shadow I'd already made peace with. "I used to," I said. "At first I thought maybe they'd realize what they'd done and call. Maybe they'd say they were sorry. And now? Now I don't need them to." I swirled the wine in my glass. Forgiveness isn't something I owe them, it's something I give myself. Thomas nodded slowly. "You've changed." "I had to," I said. "If I didn't, I'd still be sitting in that small room waiting for someone to tell me I mattered." A few weeks later, I woke up to the sound of rain on the roof. It wasn't the angry kind of rain that pounds and destroys. It was gentle, rhythmic, like the earth was whispering. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and walked to the porch. Thomas was already there, reading the newspaper. When he saw me, he handed me a mug of cocoa. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. "Not with a storm like this." "It's not a storm," he said softly. "It's cleansing." We sat together, watching the rain fall over the vines. The droplets caught the morning light and shimmered like tiny mirrors. For some reason, I started talking about things I'd never said aloud before. The day Michael died, how Ethan stopped hugging me afterward, how I poured every ounce of my grief into raising him, believing love alone could keep us whole. "I thought if I gave him everything," I said, my voice trembling, "he'd never feel the kind of emptiness I felt. But I guess I was just teaching him how to take without giving back." Thomas reached over and took my hand. His skin was warm, steady. "You didn't fail him, Ellie. You loved him. And sometimes love doesn't save people. It just shows them the way. Whether they follow it or not, that's their choice." I looked at him, tears threatening but not falling. "You always make it sound so simple." He smiled. "That's because you've been living on hard mode your whole life." We both laughed quietly. And for the first time, that laughter didn't come from pain. It came from gratitude. In the following days, I started doing something I hadn't done in years. Writing. Not just notes or thoughts, but stories. At first it was small things. Letters to my younger self. Memories of my patients. Pieces of the life I'd lived and buried. Thomas would read them in the evenings, his glasses sliding down his nose, nodding along as if my words mattered. One night he said, "You should publish these." I laughed. Who would want to read the ramblings of a 65-year-old woman? He looked at me seriously. "People who've been where you've been. People who need to know they can survive it too." I didn't answer, but I kept writing. Maybe not for the world, but for me, for the woman I used to be, the one who stayed quiet too long. Then, one afternoon, While I was baking bread in the kitchen, my phone rang. The sound startled me. It had been silent for so long that I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to receive a call. When I saw the name on the screen, my heart froze. Ethan. I hesitated before answering. Hello? His voice was shaky, unfamiliar. Mom? I closed my eyes. Ethan. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was thick with everything we'd never said. Then he broke it. She's gone, he whispered. Megan left. She said she couldn't handle me, the house, or, his voice cracked, or Amara. Amara, my granddaughter, the only light in that house. I felt the room spin. Where is she? She's with me, but I don't know what to do. She keeps crying for you. I swallowed hard. Ethan. I know I don't deserve it, he said quickly. But please, I need help. I can't do this alone. There it was, the sound of a man finally realizing what it meant to be helpless. I took a deep breath. I'll think about it. Mom, please. I said I'll think about it, I repeated softly, and hung up. The phone trembled in my hand. Thomas was standing by the doorway, his expression gentle. Are you okay? I don't know, I said. He finally called, but I don't know if I have anything left to give. Thomas stepped closer. You don't have to give him anything. You just have to decide if seeing him will heal you or reopen the wound. I stared at him, tears threatening again. I don't want to hate my own son. Then don't, he said simply. But don't lose yourself to save him again. That night I stood by the window, watching the vines sway under the moonlight. Hope and fear twisted inside me like two old friends at war. For years I had begged for a chance to be needed. Now that it was here, I wasn't sure I wanted it. Still, deep down, beneath the scars and the fatigue, a quiet voice whispered, maybe this is how healing begins, not with anger, but with choice. And for the first time in decades, I realized I had one. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, watching the soft movement of the vineyard below. The moonlight spread over the leaves like liquid silver, calm and perfect, while inside me, everything churned. Ethan's voice kept replaying in my head. The desperation, the guilt, the tremor in his words. He had never sounded that small before. At dawn, Thomas found me still awake. You didn't rest, he said quietly. He didn't ask why. He already knew. I nodded. He needs help. Megan's gone. Amara's with him. Thomas poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from me. And what do you need? The question landed heavier than I expected. I hadn't thought about what I needed in years. My whole life had been spent tending to someone else's needs, Michael's, Ethan's, my patients. Now I didn't even know what that meant anymore. I don't know, I said finally, but she's my granddaughter. I can't let her suffer because her parents forgot how to love. Thomas studied my face for a moment. Then go, but promise me one thing. What's that? Don't go to save your son. Go to protect your granddaughter and yourself. I took a deep breath. I promise. 2 days later, I was back in front of the house I had left behind. The same iron gate, the same mailbox with peeling paint. But everything felt smaller now, as if time had shrunk it in my absence. Ethan opened the door before I could knock. He looked different. His hair was messy, dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes. For the first time, I saw the boy he used to be, lost, scared, and broken. Mom, he said softly, thank you for coming. I didn't hug him. I just nodded. Where's Amara? In her room. She's been asking for you. I walked past him, my heart tight. The living room smelled faintly of dust and old coffee. Toys were scattered on the floor, dishes piled up on the counter. It was chaos, but not the kind you could fix with a mop. When I entered Amara's room, she looked up from the floor where she sat surrounded by crayons. Her little face lit up instantly. Grandma! I knelt down and she ran into my arms, her small body trembling. "I missed you," she whispered. I closed my eyes, holding her tight. "I missed you too, my love." For a few moments, everything else disappeared. The pain, the anger, the years of resentment, all of it melted under the weight of that little girl's hug. But peace doesn't last long in houses built on denial. Later that evening, Ethan sat across from me at the kitchen table. He couldn't meet my eyes. "I don't know what I'm doing, Mom," he admitted. "I wake up every morning and feel like I'm failing her." "You are," I said quietly. "But you can still change that." He flinched. "I deserve that." "You deserve honesty," I corrected. "That's what you never gave me." He looked up then, tears shining in his eyes. "I was awful to you. I know that now. I let Megan talk to you like you were nothing. I let her make you feel small. I don't even know who I was back then." "Yes, you do," I said softly. "You were a man who forgot who taught him to love." He buried his face in his hands. "I wish I could take it all back." I watched him for a long moment. I had dreamed of this apology for years, and now that it was here, it didn't feel like I thought it would. It didn't heal me. It didn't erase the scars, but it mattered. It was a beginning. "I can't change what happened," I said, my voice steady, "but I can choose what happens next. I'll help with Amara for a while, but I won't live here. Not again." Ethan nodded. "I understand." He didn't, not really, but he would. Over the next few weeks, I became Amara's anchor. I took her to school, packed her lunches, listened to her stories. She started smiling again, laughing again, and every time she did, I felt my heart mend a little more. But Megan's shadow still lingered in the house. Her photos were gone, but her presence wasn't. One afternoon, as I was folding laundry, my phone buzzed. The caller ID made my stomach tighten. Megan. I hesitated, then answered. "Eleanor," she said coldly. "So you've moved back in?" "No," I replied evenly. "I'm here for Amara." "You always did like to play the hero, didn't you?" Her tone dripped with venom. "Don't get too comfortable. I'll be coming for her soon." "She's your daughter," I said, trying to stay calm. "You can see her anytime you want, as long as you're sober and stable." Her laugh was bitter. "Oh, don't you dare judge me, old woman. You think you're better than me just because you smile for everyone and play the victim?" I didn't respond. There was no point. "You'll regret getting involved," she said before hanging up. I stood there, staring at the phone in my hand. The air felt colder suddenly. That night, I told Ethan. He shook his head. "She's angry. She won't do anything." But I knew better. I'd seen that kind of anger before, the kind that turns into obsession. 2 weeks later, I came home from picking up Amara at school to find an envelope taped to the front door. No name, no return address. Inside was a legal notice. Megan Holloway versus Eleanor Hayes. Petition for custody and allegation of emotional manipulation. My hands went cold. The world tilted. "Grandma," Amara asked softly, tugging my sleeve. "Are you okay?" I folded the letter and forced a smile. "Everything's fine, sweetheart." But everything wasn't fine. That evening, I called Thomas and told him everything. By the next morning, he was at my door with his old friend, Victor, a retired attorney with a calm voice and sharp eyes. Victor read the papers carefully. "It's baseless," he said, "but she's playing dirty. You'll need to fight back." I felt my throat tighten. "I don't want to fight. I just want to keep my granddaughter safe." Victor nodded. "Then we'll do it the right way." He helped me file for a temporary guardianship order, explaining each step slowly so I wouldn't feel lost. Ethan supported me fully. Guilt had turned him into an ally now. Still, I could see the fear in his face. He was afraid of losing his daughter, and maybe of losing the mother he'd already pushed away once. At night, after everyone was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote in my notebook again. Life has a cruel sense of timing. It waits until you've healed before testing your scars. But this time, I won't break. This time, I know who I am. The first court hearing was brutal. Megan showed up in a sharp suit, all polished arrogance, painting herself as a devoted mother. Her lawyer accused me of alienating Amara, of creating emotional dependency. I kept my composure, but inside I was trembling. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up slowly and said, "Your Honor, I didn't take my granddaughter away. I gave her back her peace." Even the judge looked up at that. Afterward, Victor placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You did good," he said. I didn't feel good. I felt exhausted, but I wasn't afraid anymore. That night, back at the vineyard, I stood under the stars and whispered, "I'm not fighting for revenge. I'm fighting for love." The wind carried my words into the night, and for the first time, I believed them. The courthouse smelled like old wood and nerves. I'd been there before, years ago, when I was a nurse testifying for a patient's rights. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't speaking for someone else. I was speaking for myself, for my granddaughter, for everything they'd tried to take from me. Thomas walked beside me through the hallway, his hand steady on my shoulder. Victor carried a thin folder, calm as ever. "You've already won," he said quietly, "because you're here." I smiled faintly. "Let's hope the judge agrees with you." When we entered the courtroom, Megan was already there. She looked flawless, as always. Sleek hair, red lipstick, black suit. She sat with her lawyer, tapping her nails against the table, like a queen waiting to reclaim her throne. When her eyes met mine, she smirked, a small, cruel thing that said, "I'm still in control." But she wasn't. Not anymore. The judge entered and the room rose. The sound of his gavel echoed like thunder. "This court will now review the petition filed by Ms. Megan Holloway regarding the custody of her minor daughter, Amara Hayes." I could feel my pulse in my throat. I took a deep breath and glanced at Victor. He nodded slightly, a silent reminder. Stand tall. Megan's lawyer began first, spinning her web of half-truths. "Your Honor," he said, "our client has been unfairly alienated from her child. The grandmother, Ms. Hayes, has created an emotionally manipulative environment, making the minor believe her mother is unsafe and unloving. This has caused severe psychological distress." Megan dabbed her eyes with a tissue, perfectly timed. It was theatre, and she knew her lines well. When it was Victor's turn, he stood calmly, his voice even but sharp. "Your Honor, what my client created was not alienation, it was safety. Ms. Hayes provided stability where chaos once lived. She offered kindness where cruelty took root. The only manipulation here is the attempt to rewrite history." The judge looked at Megan. "Do you have evidence of this alleged manipulation?" Her lawyer handed over a few printed screenshots, texts taken out of context, a video clip where Amara cried and said she didn't want to go with her mother. Victor took the papers, scanned them, then placed them gently on the table. "Your Honor, the child cried because her mother yelled at her the night before this video was taken. You'll see that in the accompanying school counselor's report, which I've submitted." The judge nodded, reading briefly. His expression softened. Then it was my turn to speak. I stood slowly, feeling every year of my life in my bones. My voice, however, didn't shake. "Your Honor," I began, "I didn't come here to take a child away from her mother. I came here because I refused to let a child live in fear." I paused, glancing at Megan. Her jaw tightened. "I raised my son to be kind," I continued, "and though he lost his way, I believe he's trying to find it again. But this isn't about him. It's about Amara, a little girl who deserves peace, who deserves laughter and school plays, and someone who listens when she talks about the stars." My voice broke for a second, but I pushed through. "If loving her is my crime, then I'll accept any punishment you give me. But please don't make her pay for the mistakes of the adults around her." The room went quiet. Even Megan's lawyer looked down. When I sat back down, Victor whispered, "You just won." But I didn't believe it yet. Not until the judge cleared his throat and said, "I've reviewed the documents, the testimonies, and the counselor's report. This court finds no evidence of emotional manipulation. In fact, it finds evidence of care, compassion, and stability provided by Ms. Hayes. Megan stiffened. Her lawyer tried to interrupt, but the judge raised his hand. Ms. Holloway, you have demonstrated a pattern of neglect and emotional volatility. Custody will remain with Ms. Hayes. Supervised visitation will be arranged for the mother. Case closed. His gavel hit the bench. The sound echoed like a final door slamming shut, not against me, but against the years of silence, humiliation, and pain. Megan turned toward me, fury in her eyes. You think this is over? She hissed. You don't know what I'm capable of. I stood calmly, looked her straight in the face and said, Yes, I do. That's why I'm not afraid of you anymore. She blinked, thrown off by the steadiness in my voice. Then she grabbed her purse and stormed out, her heels clicking like gunshots across the floor. Thomas exhaled slowly beside me. You were magnificent. I shook my head. No, I was just tired of being quiet. Victor smiled. That's when people are the most powerful. Outside the courthouse, Amara was waiting with Thomas. The moment she saw me, she ran toward me, her little shoes tapping against the stone floor. Grandma! I dropped to my knees, catching her in my arms. It's okay now, sweetheart, I whispered, tears spilling down my cheeks. You're safe. She pulled back, her small hands touching my face. You're crying. Happy tears, I said, laughing through them. Just happy tears. Thomas crouched beside us, resting a hand on my shoulder. You did it, Eleanor. No, I said softly, looking at Amara. We did. That evening, we celebrated at the vineyard. The sky was streaked with pink and orange, the air warm and full of life. Thomas cooked his famous pot roast, Amara baked a crooked chocolate cake, and Victor brought a bottle of the vineyard's finest wine. We ate outside on the porch, laughing, sharing stories. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I felt like I was living. When Amara went to bed, I sat on the porch swing with Thomas. The night hummed with crickets. The stars looked close enough to touch. He took my hand gently. You know, I've seen brave people in my life, soldiers, doctors, even lawyers, but none of them compare to you. I smiled faintly. I wasn't brave, Thomas. I was just done being broken. He kissed the top of my hand. That's what bravery looks like. Later that night, when the house had gone quiet, I sat at my desk with my notebook and wrote, Today I stood in front of the world that once tried to silence me, and I spoke, not because I wanted to win, but because silence had already taken enough. I closed the notebook and looked out at the moonlit vines. They swayed gently in the breeze, just like that day I first arrived. Except now, I was no longer a guest. I was home. And for the first time in decades, I wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. Because I had learnt something powerful. When life pushes you out of one home, it's only making room for the one you build for yourself. Morning sunlight spilled across the vineyard like gold dust. The storm was finally over, not the one outside, but the one that had lived inside me for years. I sat on the porch, coffee in hand, watching Amara chase butterflies across the garden. Her laughter rose like music, the kind that fixes something broken in your soul. Thomas came out carrying 2 mugs, his hair a little messy, his eyes still soft from sleep. You were up early, he said. I couldn't sleep, I replied, smiling faintly. My heart's too loud today. He handed me my second cup of coffee and sat beside me. Loud with what? Peace, I said after a moment. It's been so long, I forgot what it sounded like. He chuckled quietly. You've earned it. I took a sip, letting the warmth settle inside me. The air smelled of earth and hope. The vines were heavy with fruit, the promise of another harvest. Life had continued, and somehow, so had I. In the months after the trial, things began to fall into place in ways I never expected. The community that once gossiped about me began to approach with smiles, small apologies hidden in their words. Some brought pies, others flowers. One woman said, "You made us realize it's never too late to fight back." I didn't hold grudges. I was too busy being grateful. Amara thrived. She painted, sang, and filled every corner of the house with joy. On weekends, she followed Thomas around the vineyard, asking endless questions about grapes, roots, and soil. He answered each one like she was the most important person in the world. Sometimes I caught myself watching them together, the man I once lost and the child I almost lost, and thought, maybe that's what healing really is. Not forgetting what hurt, but building something beautiful on top of it. One afternoon, while Thomas was labeling wine bottles and Amara was painting on the porch, I sat at my desk, looking at my old notebook. The pages were filled with fragments, bits of my story, letters I'd never sent, prayers I'd whispered in silence. I started writing again, not because I wanted to be heard, but because I finally had something to say. They told me I was too old to start over, too tired, too late. But I learned that the only thing truly too late is the moment you stop believing in yourself. I didn't realize I was crying until a tear fell on the page. Not from sadness, from release. A few weeks later, an envelope arrived in the mail. The sender's logo said Horizon Publishing. I thought it was a mistake at first, but when I opened it, my breath caught. They had read about my case, seen the court transcripts, and found my statement. Your words moved us, the letter said. We'd like to publish your story. The world needs to hear it. I sat frozen for a long time. Then I called Thomas. He arrived breathless, wiping his hands on a towel. What's wrong? I handed him the letter. His eyes scanned it, and then he looked at me with a smile that lit up his whole face. Eleanor Hayes, he said softly. The world is finally catching up to you. The months that followed were a blur of interviews, editing sessions, and new beginnings. My story, the day my son threw me out and the car that changed everything, became a book. Not a bestseller, not some glossy magazine sensation, but something better, a voice. A voice for women who had been told they were done, finished, forgotten. Letters started pouring in. Handwritten notes, emails, messages from strangers. One woman wrote, I left my abusive husband after reading your story. Another said, you gave me courage to forgive my daughter. And one simply wrote, thank you for reminding me that I still matter. I read every one of them, often through tears. I realized then that pain, once shared, becomes power. The book launch was small, a community centre filled with folding chairs, fairy lights, and the smell of coffee and pastries. But to me, it was grander than any ballroom. Amara sat in the front row, beaming with pride. When it was my turn to speak, my hands trembled slightly. I looked out at the crowd and said, this story isn't about revenge, it's about rebirth. About what happens when life tries to bury you and you realise you're a seed. The applause that followed was soft at first, then grew louder, fuller, like thunder wrapped in gratitude. Life settled into a quiet rhythm after that. My book made its way into libraries, book clubs, even classrooms. I started speaking at small events, women's shelters, churches, senior centres. Each time I saw faces like mine, tired but unbroken. One day, after a talk at a local high school, a young girl came up to me. She looked nervous, clutching her notebook. Ma'am, she said, do you ever regret forgiving them? I thought for a moment before answering. No, I said, because forgiveness isn't for them. It's how I stopped carrying their sins. She nodded slowly, tears in her eyes, and whispered, thank you. That night, I wrote in my journal again, forgiveness is not surrender. It's how you take back your freedom. A year later, Thomas proposed. He did it right there in the vineyard, under a canopy of lights Amara helped hang. He went down on one knee, holding a small velvet box. I laughed through tears. Thomas Reynolds, you old fool, I said. We're too old for this. He smiled. Maybe, but I'd rather grow old beside you than waste another day wishing I had. I said yes. The wedding was simple, just a handful of friends, Victor and Amara, who carried the rings down the aisle, crying before I even said, I do. I wore a pale cream dress and carried lilacs, of course. When Thomas kissed me, the crowd cheered. I felt the weight of every goodbye I'd ever said finally lift from my shoulders. That night, as we danced under the stars, Amara whispered, "Grandma, you're like a princess." I smiled. "No, sweetheart, I'm something better. I'm free." Years have passed since that day. The vineyard flourishes. Thomas and I wake up early, drink coffee on the porch, and laugh about nothing in particular. Amara's a teenager now, smart, curious, full of life. She wants to study psychology. "I want to help people understand love," she says. I tell her she already does. Sometimes she asks about her parents. I tell her the truth, gently, without bitterness. Ethan has tried to make amends. He visits sometimes, quieter now, humbler. Megan doesn't. But I no longer wait for her to. Because that's what healing really is, when you stop waiting for an apology and start living your life anyway. One evening I sat on the porch as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Amara came out with her old sketchbook, showing me a drawing she'd made, me, Thomas, and her standing in the vineyard. Above it, she'd written in big letters, "Home." I hugged her tight, my heart swelling with a love so big it scared me. And I realized something then. The car that stopped at my gate years ago didn't just take me away from pain. It brought me to grace. Because sometimes God doesn't rescue you by fixing what's broken. He rescues you by helping you walk away. I looked at the vines stretching across the hills, glimmering in the twilight. If anyone had told me that being thrown out of my own home would lead me here, to peace, to love, to purpose, I would have laughed. But now I know, every ending is just an invitation to begin again. So whenever someone asks me, "What happened the day your son told you to leave?" I smile and say, "That was the day my life began." I am Voices of Eleanor Hayes, where true stories are told with honesty, so that everyone can find their own strength. If this story touched you, please leave a comment below, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for listening all the way through. And remember, no matter your age, it's never too late to stand up, walk out, and begin again.